I'm Chef Anya Lee. That's my name. If you forget it, it's all good. I totally understand. So you can call me hey you, hey chef, whatever you want, all right? But there's no, we're all chefs today, so that might get a little confusing, all right? So I've been passionate about food and health since I was a kid. When I was about 10 years old, my mom invited me to cook dinner for the family, and I said yes. And I jumped right in. We picked out a recipe, went to the grocery store, and then I started cooking up a storm. And I cooked until about 10 p.m. that night, which, as you can imagine, was chaos in the kitchen. But eventually we sat down, clunked glasses, took a deep breath, and began to eat. And at that moment, everyone was calm, and they seemed to like the food I had made, and I was just thrilled. So from then on, I was begging to be in the kitchen. And quickly my mom said, Anya, why don't you call our local caterer? Why don't you see if you can go help her for a change and get out of my kitchen? So I did, and I ended up working with that wonderful caterer all the way through middle school and high school. And then upon deciding where to go to college, my options were culinary school, of course, or the other option, as my parents called it, the 4-year well-rounded education, as I'm sure some of you understand. I see a couple giggles there. So I ended up going that route to keep my options open. And I went to UC Berkeley. While I was at Cal, I created my own major, the political economy of food. That was a fascinating major. It led me to study abroad in Lyon, France, which is known to be the gastronomic capital of the world. Yes, better food than Paris, they say, although it is debatable. And while I was there, I ended up working in quite a few restaurants, learned a ton, dove right in, and Lyon is right on the border of Italy. So as you can imagine, there was quite a lot of Italian food in the area. And I also bopped over to Italy and worked there as well. So learned a lot about French food, Italian food, Mediterranean food, everything in its like. And then I came back here to finish my degree. Worked at Chez Panisse by Alice Waters, if any of you are familiar with that, my senior year. I'm seeing a couple nods. And then I graduated and started a catering company, Anya Lee Catering. And that catering company was going very well, very strong for a good 6 or so years until the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit, we had to close it down, but I changed to virtual cooking classes, which is actually my favorite thing to do yet. Now, just a few highlights from this past, from catering. I did end up getting a surprise call in 2016 from the Cleveland Cavaliers when they were in town for the finals. So I did end up cooking them to victory, sorry not sorry, and I was in their locker room for the champagne showers and holding the trophy with them, which was tons of fun. And so as you can imagine, I was very health focused with those meals. That was a big part of our focus. And then we got to know the Golden State Warriors while being at the Oracle Arena. And so they ended up inviting us into their locker room, and I cooked for them for about 3 years. So if you like basketball, you know that kind of stuff. I'm seeing some cheers, cool. Then you hopefully find that interesting. But I have a lot of fun stories about the players. I worked with them one-on-one. So it was a lot of fun. Feel free to ask stories later when we're rolling out our pasta and we're hanging out. And then let's see, what else? Then just a couple more fun facts, and then we'll dive in. A few years ago, I was asked to be on Cutthroat Kitchen with Alton Brown. So if you like to watch the Food Network and you want to see me get massacred, it's season 15, episode 10. That's right, I got sabotaged like no other. It was hilarious. I laughed my whole way through. And that just led me to loving teaching cooking classes even more, because I get to experiment with others in the kitchen all the time and try something new, which was a similar process. And then I will say that I redeemed myself on the Food Network in a more recent episode on Supermarket Stakeout with Alex Garnaschelli, season 4, episode 13. And then let's see, besides that, what else? I've cooked for the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, tons of fun, tons of different cool people. But like I said, this is my favorite job yet, because I get to work with you and you get to repeat what we're making in the comfort of your home, which means that hopefully you can do this over and over again, which is so cool, because I can pass everything I've learned to you, and you can roll with it and have a blast. So anyway, that's why I'm here teaching your class today. I love what I do. And I am really excited for you to make some green peachy pasta, which is full of spinach, okay? Full of fiber, full of protein, full of amazing things, antioxidants, right into your gorgeous pasta. It's gonna end up looking a little bit like green beans, okay? You'll see it's really interesting, but it is pasta. And this pasta is traditional in Tuscany, okay? So it's really cool, Tuscan pasta. Definitely encourage you to pair it with some Sangiovese and relax and enjoy after this class. So what we're going to do is I'd like you to start by grabbing a pot, and let's get it filled with water and a good couple big pinches of salt. All right, ideally sea salt if you have it. It's the best kind of salt for you. And we're gonna get it boiling. And I just want to get that prepared so that later on we have it ready and it's at least really warm. And then we can boil our pasta in it. So anytime you're cooking, you wanna think about what takes a long time, and it's usually water or the oven. So those are things we wanna start with, all right? So once you've got that water in a pot with a bunch of big pinches of salt, you want that water to be like ocean water, okay? Quite a few, a couple big pinches of salt, and then get it boiling. And that salt is just gonna infuse into the pasta and make it just taste that much better, okay? So that's the goal. Those of you who are hanging out, the next thing you could do is you could grab a food processor and get that all set up, all right? Because we are going to be using a food processor next. If you do not have a food processor, a blender will also work. So in your food processor, we are going to be chopping up ideally about 5 ounces of spinach, okay? And I will show you what it looks like. This is a 10-ounce package. It says it right on the package. So I want about half of this package, which as I open it up, let's see here, how many cups do I think this is of spinach? So I'm gonna pour this right into, let's see if it was like spinach packed into a cup. 1, 2, I'd say like 4 cups of spinach, all right? So if you have a whole spinach, a bigger spinach instead of this baby spinach, that's great too. Just make sure to rinse it really well. Spinach tends to come with a lot of dirt on it, and you can taste that in your pasta. So really make sure to get this spinach super well rinsed, all right? And give it a little dab with a towel. Make sure you dry it off. And then we're gonna throw it in here, and we're gonna get it blending. We're gonna get it nice and chopped up. If you have a really small food processor, which I can imagine a lot of you do it in waves, okay? Chop some spinach, add a little more, and we're just gonna get this chopped up, and then we're gonna eventually be adding flour and salt, and that's gonna make our pasta. It's the simplest recipe. It's unbelievable how it works. So adding my spinach right here, and I'm just gonna get it chopping. There we go. It's only gonna take a minute. Okay, great, so easy. So you can see here that I just gave mine a blitz, and from that big pile of spinach, I now just have, it doesn't have to be super finely chopped yet, okay? It's gonna get chopped up more and more when we add the flour, but I want you to just chop it up so it's a little smaller so that now there's room for flour in here, okay? So next up, we're going to be adding in 1 1/4 cups of flour. Ideally, in a perfect world, you would have a 00 flour, and I love to use Caputo flour. It looks like this. It comes straight from Italy, and it's a really high quality wheat. And what they do with 00 flour is they take a piece of the wheat, they find the perfect ratio of gluten to protein to make pasta and pizza, and then they blend it up to be as fine and light and fluffy as it can possibly be. So all-purpose flour works. I like the flavor, I like the texture a lot better in 00, okay? So that's just a little insight. If you don't have a 00, it's not the end of the world, but that's why I use it. And also I find that it's a little easier to digest because all-purpose flour has a lot of stuff in it and you don't know what's in it. This is one ingredient. It's just the wheat grain blended up. All right, so 1 1/4 cup, and I'm just pouring it into my measuring cup, and then tossing it in. And then we want to add a decent amount of salt. So let's go ahead and add 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. I think that's going to be a good amount. And I always use fine sea salt when I'm using salt. Table salt is super boring and not flavorful and not as good for you. So I recommend you invest in some good high quality sea salt or pink Himalayan salt because it's full of minerals that your body needs, okay? We need that salt to be able to retain moisture. And the problem with a lot of excess salt in our lives comes from processed foods, and they use table salt, and the table salt is very processed and it's stripped of a lot of nutrients that our body needs. So buy yourself a pure salt. It does make a big difference. And with that, I have my flour, I have my 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and I have my spinach in my food processor. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend it up, and I'm going to let it blend, and it's going to blend into a bright green ball of dough. You just wait. We don't even have to add water. If it ends up feeling like it's really dry or it's not making a big ball of dough that looks like Play-Doh, then you're going to add just like a teaspoon at a time, a little bit of water, okay? So let's go ahead and experiment and get it going. But there's so much spinach and water in spinach that it actually does it really well without. All right, this looks awesome. Super excited. So there you go. You have this beautiful dough, all right? And it should be a little bit like Play-Doh. So I'm going to pull mine out. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of flour down on a cutting board. So if you don't have a cutting board, pull one out. And we're just going to knead this dough with a little bit of flour to make sure it's the right consistency. So mine is actually quite sticky. So I'm going to take my flour and press it out all over, rub it out all over the cutting board. And then I'm going to grab my dough. And if anyone's unsure about their dough, please let me know because we can talk through it and make sure that you get it to where you want it to be. All right, so here we go. Like I said, mine's really sticky, so I had a lot of spinach in there, and it was very moist spinach. So you never really know what you're going to get out of the spinach, and this is why we put some flour down, and we're going to adjust it as we see fit. And the goal here will be to create a dough that's not sticking to our fingers, and it'll feel like silly putty. So now I'm rolling this dough around in flour so that it's no longer sticky. And I want to start working a little bit more flour into my dough because my dough is very sticky. And I don't necessarily want it to be really sticky. So what I'm doing now is I'm folding my dough in half, and then I'm pressing it with the palm of my hand. Folding it, pressing it, folding it, pressing it. And I'm going to do that for a little while just to make the dough a little firmer, a little stronger. Remember, this dough has to go in boiling water. So we want to activate the glutens right now by kneading it and getting it to be nice and strong. And this is how you really make it so that later on in the water it doesn't fall apart, all right? So we're folding it in half and pressing it down. And if it starts to stick to your fingers or your cutting board, drizzle a little bit more flour on the top, and so that it becomes a good consistency that's not so sticky. All right, so folding it in half, pressing it, folding it in half, pressing it. All right, and then voila. It's looking really good over here. All right. And there we go. So I have a ball of dough now that I'm pretty excited about, okay? It's not too sticky when I touch it, all right? It's got a little more flour in there. Maybe as I roll it out, it gets a little stickier, so I'm just going to make sure I coat it with flour. But I think it's where I want it to be. And it's still pretty goopy, okay? It's still floppy a little bit, but it's for the most part, it's a good, sturdy ball of dough. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to be making sure we coat the ball of dough with flour. So whenever you're done, it looks like some of you are still finishing up. Whenever you're done, I want you to roll this ball of dough around in flour. Flour is like sunscreen for your skin. It protects the ball of dough and it holds the moisture inside. Okay, So we really want to make sure that we coat it with flour so that it stays the way we want it. And then we're just gonna wrap it in a really well wrung out damp towel. So I'm gonna rinse my hands, I'm gonna grab a towel, and I'm gonna run it under a little bit of water, rinse it out wring it out really well. All right, and then I'm just gonna drape it over the ball of dough, and we're gonna let the ball of dough sit. All right, so I'm grabbing my towel, getting it a little bit wet. So now it's just ever so slightly damp, and I'm gonna put my ball of dough right inside and then just wrap it up, and we're gonna let it sit and rest. So I'm gonna get it out of the way, all right? So once you have it rolled up, and John Paul and Lee said, I'm gonna keep going, but let me know if you want me to repeat anything as we go, okay? So I'm gonna get stuff out of the way, keep my flour nearby because we're gonna use that later. And then I'm just gonna give my cutting board the quickest rinse because now we're gonna chop a bunch of vegetables on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our onion, all right? Onion and garlic, and get those chopped up. So I want you to pull that out. So we're going to be using an onion. You can use red or yellow here. Both will be great, all right? When I cut an onion, I like to look at it as if it's a little face. You've got a whale spout at the top, all right? And you've got a little hairy beard at the bottom. So when we cut through this onion, I want you to cut the face in half. So you keep half of the hairy beard or the root on both halves, all right? And this is how we're gonna practice dicing an onion today because it works like a charm and it makes it less likely that you cry, all right? So now I have 2 halves with the root intact. Now I'm going to just slice off the top whale spout, and we can compost that. When you're slicing, I want you to think about your knife skills. This is a really great opportunity for you to practice having professional knife skills. And how you hold your knife is you should use your pointer finger and your thumb and pinch the blade and then wrap your other fingers around the handle. And that is how professionals hold their knife, okay? And this is how you're the most precise and most efficient. Be careful not to put your finger up the blade, all right? That's really straining and you lose a lot of control. So make sure to put your pointer finger and your thumb right on the blade and wrap your fingers around the handle, all right? So now that we know that, we're gonna go through and take our outer layers of our onion off. Make sure to take any layer that's floppy. So sometimes it's 2, maybe even 3 layers. Get everything off that wouldn't be crunchy and delicious, all right? So getting rid of those, I'm gonna compost my outer layers. If you want to, you can save those outer layers and you can use them to make a homemade vegetable broth. So the outer layers of onions, garlic, all that kind of stuff. If I weren't leaving on vacation tomorrow, I would put those into a little bag, just like a compost bag or something, and keep it in my fridge. And then I'd throw those, plus any other, little vegetable parts I have, throw them in a big pot tomorrow and let it sit and cook, and that turns into a really good vegetable broth. Just a fun little tip. All right, now we're gonna dice the tomato. So I'm gonna take my knife and I'm cutting in almost to the root, not quite, but close, so that the onion is still intact, okay? And then I'm going to take my knife and slice in from the side. All right, so I put my hand on top and I went right through sideways, okay? So I'm just making it really easy to dice. Now I'm gonna come from the top and just slice down. So I already have 2 good incisions into the onion, and at this point, I just slice through, and then I have a beautiful dice. If you start to cry with the onion, the best trick I've ever learned is running my fingers under cold water. Seems so silly, it doesn't make any sense, but it cuts the chemicals and stops the crying, I promise. And I'm gonna need to do that shortly because I'm about to really tear up here, you guys. I can feel it. So watch out, I'm gonna be running my fingers under cold water. And this onion is getting me, oh baby. All right, so hang tight. In a second, I'll be back or else I'm not gonna be able to see the screen any longer. Okay, there we go. I've got my diced onion. I'm rinsing my fingers. I'm going to scoop my onion over to the side of my cutting board. And then I'm gonna chop up some garlic. I love garlic, okay? I'm going to use 3 or 4 cloves here because that's my jam. But if you're not a huge garlic fan, but you like it in the background, I would say use 1 to 2 cloves, okay? But like I said, I love it. I like my pasta extra garlicky, so I'm going to pull off a good 4 cloves. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these cloves and I'm going to slice off the bottom part that connects to the root. And garlic, by the way, is so good for your immune system. So if you're hearing about summer flus going around or anything like that, get yourself some garlic and some onion because it's great for your immune system. So as I slice off the bottom root, the part that was connected to the root, the skins are coming off pretty easily. If they don't come off easily, I'm going to take my knife and turn it sideways and just tap the garlic a little bit and loosen it up, loosen up the skin. All right, so now we're going to mince this garlic. I encourage you to mince it. I encourage you to take the time to practice your knife skills today, okay? Because we're going to all do it together. If you have a garlic press, they are good and they're helpful on a busy weeknight when you want to move fast in the kitchen, but they do bruise the garlic and they really do affect the flavor of the garlic. So it's and also if you have pre-chopped garlic from the store or pre-peeled garlic, it's not as good. So get your garlic head, okay? Slice it up, it's worth it. So I'm just gonna go through these garlic cloves and slice them in one direction a bunch of times. And then I'm gonna go through and slice them another direction, and I'm going to start getting them to be really small. So mincing is when you make it small enough that if you were to accidentally bite into a piece, it wouldn't be super potent, all right? It wouldn't drive you crazy. Garlic is really intense. So if you have a bite of one of these bigger chunks, you're not going to like it, all right? It's going to be really, really intense. So we want to mince it to the point where it's small enough that it wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt our tongue or our tummy if we bit into one of the little pieces, okay? So that's the goal. So I'm just going back and forth with my knife a bunch of times, working on my knife skills. John Paul's nailing that knife skill there. Love it, John Paul. You guys can check it out. It's gorgeous. All right. And again, back and forth, back and forth. There we go. Okay, beautiful. So I went through it a bunch of times. I love how the size of my garlic is now. It's all really small. I think I'm getting it to be where I want it to be. So voila. Perfect. So I'm just going to slide this garlic to a different part of my cutting board and get it out of the way. All right, because we're going to be using that in a bit. So those of you who are still chopping, just let me know if you want me to repeat anything. Next, we're going to grab our zucchini. Let's get that set up. All right, so if you haven't rinsed it already, go ahead and rinse your zucchini. And we are going to dice this, all right? So I'm going to take my zucchini sideways and I'm going to slice off the bottom, the part that was connected to the root, all right? And then I'm just going to make this so easy. I'm going to go through from the top to the bottom and I'm going to slice it in half, but I kept the top on there. So it's like this, okay? It's still on there. It's just going to help keep everything together. And then I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to slice it the same way again. So essentially we're slicing it into 4 chunks. All right, so now I have 4 pieces coming out of that main piece. Hopefully you can see that here on the camera. Okay, so if you didn't see that, let me know. And then I'm going to go through with my knife and just slice it about finger width distance, maybe a little skinnier than my finger. Okay, and we're going to saute these and make them nice soft chunks later on. So there we go. And that's how you cut your zucchini to really be easy and not have it roll everywhere and make it easy to control. Okay, so I'm going to make another little pile on my cutting board. If your cutting board is getting crowded, you can move this to a bowl or a plate, all right? You can get it out of the way. Next up, we're gonna grab our tomatoes. I have these beautiful cherry tomatoes ready to rock, all right? I'm so excited, I love these. And I'm just gonna start slicing them in half, okay? And I want about a cup or so of cherry tomatoes. So just going through, giving them a slice. If they're really small, you don't have to slice them in half, but I find I like the way they cook a little better when they're sliced in half. All right. Slicing, slicing, slicing. Give them a try too. There's nothing better than a summer cherry tomato. They're so juicy and sweet and tender and delicious. They're a whole different vegetable, or a different fruit, really, than what they are other times of year. So like I said, we want about a cup of cherry tomatoes sliced here. So it's going to be quite a few, maybe 30 or 40 cherry tomatoes. So I'm just going through, slicing them up just in half, keeping it super simple. And taking off the cherry tops too, or the tomato tops. So if you see those tomato tops, pop them off. I have a funny story about tomato tops. So tomatoes grow on a vine, okay, and they make the most beautiful flowers right before the tomato blooms, which the tomato flower turns into the tomato. What's fascinating is that tomatoes are considered nightshades, which means that the flower that creates them is actually poisonous. So I once, years ago, was making a cheese board for a client, and I had a tomato plant in my backyard, and I knew I had all these beautiful tomato flowers back there. And so I went into the backyard and I picked some of my tomato flowers and put them all over the cheese board. And then I was so excited, gave it to my client. And then I went to the flower store that afternoon, right after I delivered it. And I told them I was so excited about my beautiful tomato flowers that I had put on the cheese board. And right away they were like, no, don't do that. They're poisonous. And I couldn't believe it. So I called, luckily the client happened to be a friend of mine, so she forgave me. And I called her and I was like, please tell me no one ate those flowers. And luckily she hadn't served it yet, so she picked them all off. But anyway, learn from my mistake. Long story short, you don't eat the flowers on the tomato plant, okay? Don't use them as decoration on your cheese board because you will regret it. And then I am going to grab a big saute pan, okay? Something nice and wide and big. All right, we want a lot of surface area for all of this to sit and get sauteed, okay? So big wide saute pan. I love my cast iron pans here. Sorry, not my cast iron, my copper. I love my cast iron too, but I love my copper pans. They've got a really thick bottom and they heat up really fast and they work beautifully. So that's what I'm gonna use today. All right. And what I'm gonna do is, without any oil, I'm gonna preheat my pan on medium-high heat. And the reason we're doing this is because we wanna saute. And when you saute, you preheat your pan 30 to 60 seconds just until it's the perfect temperature. Then you add cold oil and your food. And that causes the pores of the food to have time to come together and to tighten up and to sear. So you can get a nice searing on the outside and keep all the juices and the nutrients on the inside. If you preheat your pan with oil in the pan, then the hot oil seeps into the pores of the food and fries it, killing all the juices and nutrients on the inside. So we really want to remember, and everyone say this to yourself out loud so you don't forget, hot pan, cold oil. So now that I've had my pan preheated for between 30 to 60 seconds, I'm going to double check it. I'm going to get my fingers wet. I have a little bit of water on my fingers. And I'm just going to flick it on my pan, and my water sizzled. So I know it's where I want it to be. So before my pan starts smoking and getting too hot, I'm going to take my olive oil, all right? Drizzle a tablespoon or so of olive oil, 1 to 2 tablespoons. And then I'm going to add my onions. and we're going to give the onions a little head start. All right, so they should sizzle, but not pop, all right? There shouldn't be any popping. If it's popping, you want to turn down your heat because it's too hot. Sometimes at this point, I end up turning my heat down to medium because my pan gets hot really fast. So I'm going to shake this pan, get all those onions everywhere. Great. And then to the onions, I'm going to add a little fun. I'm going to add a little bit of heat, okay? So I'm going to grab some red chili flakes and add a pinch or two of red chili flakes. And this is just going to add some flavor and some heat to the pan, all right? So just a pinch, maybe two. Red chili flakes have a bit of a heat, but a bit of kick there, so be careful not to add too much. All right, so I've got those in there. Now I can, they've had about a minute in the pan, so I'm going to give them a little bit of a a stir so they can saute, and then I'm going to let them sit. All right, don't ever obsess with stirring because that can slow down your cooking process and stop it from getting a really nice browning on the bottom. So stir it, let it sit. Stir it, let it sit. All right? Meanwhile, let's go ahead and just get our pine nuts out and ready to go. All right? So that you have those nearby when you need them. So I'm just going to pull mine out here. Perfect. And now, pine nuts are always better when they're toasted. So if you want to, you can grab another pan, and if you don't want to make another dirty dish, you can just skip this. But what I'm going to do is I have a pan back here. I have a cast iron pan, and I'm going to add about a quarter cup or so of pine nuts to that pan. And I already turned on the heat, so I have my heat on medium heat. And I'm just going to toast these pine nuts for a minute or two so that they're a little bit tastier, okay? A little bit more full of flavor. So I have medium heat for my pine nuts, and I'm even going to set a timer. I'm going to check them in 3 minutes because they burn really easily. I don't want them sitting there too long, okay? So medium heat, they should be good in just a minute or two. So my onions are looking really good. They're starting to be opaque. They're starting to get some smell. I'm getting the aromas, okay? It smells really wonderful. I'm seeing a little bit of a browning on the outside. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my garlic, and we're going to add it and just give it 30 to 60 seconds with the garlic. Garlic burns really easily, so we don't want to cook it too long, but I do want to give it a little head start before I add my vegetables. So I just added my garlic to the onions once the onions seemed like they were pretty well cooked, okay? They were starting to turn opaque. Again, I have my heat on medium-high heat, so maybe like a 5 or a 6 out of 10, all right? And then I'm toasting those nuts on a different burner for a few minutes on medium heat. And then as soon as I smell that garlic, which it's already getting there, all right, just 30 to 60 seconds, I'm going to be adding in my tomatoes and my zucchini. All right, I know we have a lot going on now, so hang in with me, but let me know if anything's going too fast, okay? Because I really want to make sure you're not left behind and that you're successful. So just let me know. All right. So my timer is just about to go off from my pine nuts. I can see that they've already toasted, so I'm just going to turn off the heat and push them all to the side of my pan so that they don't keep cooking. All right, if you have an electric stove, definitely make sure to take your pan off of the stove or just pour those pine nuts into a bowl, okay? But they're very quick and they burn fast. Next up, we've got that garlic cooked now. It's time to add our zucchini and our tomatoes. So pour them in. All right. We're not adding any salt or pepper quite yet because we want to get them a little bit seared before we add salt and pepper. And that's because salt is a chemical and it causes a reaction and it causes water to be pulled out of the food. So we don't want our food to be watery, okay? So I'm just gonna stir all of this around and get it cooking in here. It's starting to get really hot in my pan, so I'm gonna turn it down a little bit. And they're gonna saute for about 5 minutes on medium heat. And once we finish sauteing them, we're going to be adding a little salt and pepper. We're going to be adding some lemon zest, okay? We're going to add some sort of acidity, so either wine or lemon juice or both, all right? And then we're also going to be adding some capers. So at this point, let's go ahead and chop our capers so we can get those ready. So I have some capers here, and I would just add, let's see, I don't even know what I wrote in the recipe, but I'm thinking a couple tablespoons. Yep, that's what I wrote. All right, so a couple tablespoons of capers. You're just going to drain it, excuse me, and then we're going to give them a little bit of a chop. All right, and this is going to add a really fun, salty flavor to your dish. Almost as if there's fish in there, but not with a fishy taste, all right? Just a little bit of that salty umami effect that fish can do. All right, so I'm just giving them a rough chop, making them a little bit smaller. And I'm going to be adding these shortly. All right, so just to reiterate, I have the onions, the garlic, the zucchini, and the tomatoes sauteing on medium heat. I have my pine nuts fully toasted with some nice browning on them, with the heat now turned off, and they're pulled to the side of the pan. I'm going to use them later. I have 2 tablespoons of capers that I just chopped up, and I'm going to be adding them to the pan as soon as I chop them. All right, so I'm going to go ahead now and add some capers to the pan to give this a little bit of a flavor boost. So I'm going to stir this up. Make sure they're continuing to cook and the zucchini and tomato is getting softened. Okay? And then I have some white wine that I'm going to have nearby, all right, that I can pour in. And then I'm also going to grab a lemon. Where did I put my lemon here? There it is. And I'm going to zest, lemon zest, right into this dish. So I have what's called a microplane. If you don't have one of these, I recommend you invest in one. But if you don't have it, you can use just any sort of small zester, so a small grater, all right? And we're going to be zesting just the very thin outer layer, the yellow part of the lemon, right into this dish, okay? So here we go. And I'm going to do as much as I can from this lemon because zest is flavor. And it doesn't hurt to have a lot of zest in this dish. All right. So there we go. Adding in a bunch of this lemon zest, making sure not to add any of the white, none of that what we call pith, because that can be really bitter and not so tasty. There we go. I've got some lemon zest ready to rock. Boom. Okay. And then I'm going to cut my lemon in half, and I'm going to end up squeezing some lemon juice into my dish. But once I've had it cook a little bit more, I want it to cook down and get a little softer before I add any lemon juice. So, next up, all right, again, I'm just letting this cook a little bit longer, letting the zucchini soften a little bit more. And then I'm going to be adding my citrus, okay? And I think I'm getting pretty close. So at this point, we can add some salt, all right? So let's go ahead and add some salt and let that start to infuse into the flavor. So I'm going to add a couple shakes or pinches of salt. And then I'm also going to add some black pepper. If you have fresh black pepper, then I recommend you freshly grate it, because it's always tastier when it's fresh. Okay, so fresh black pepper. Give it a little bit of a stir. And I'm going to add a slight bit more olive oil, all right, just to soften it up and give it a layer of fresh olive oil. So another tablespoon or two, and stir it up. And my zucchini is still nice and green, which is how I want it, but it's looking like softer, which is gonna be really nice to eat. The tomatoes are very soft and juicy. So I have it where I want it to be at this point, and I'm going to be adding in some white wine and or lemon juice. So I'm gonna add about half a cup of white wine here. A nice dry white wine is always great. And this is going to make it into a wine sauce, which is really just going to enhance the flavor, or a lemon sauce. And anytime you're cooking, you really want some sort of acidity, some acid, to make it bright, to make it happy and dance on your tongue. So that's what we're doing with this wine and lemon juice. And then I'm going to take half of a lemon and squeeze it also into my sauce. And if you're not using wine, you can go ahead and use the full lemon. And later on, you might end up adding more lemon juice anyway, because it just depends on your preference. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna give it a little bit of a stir. And then I'm gonna turn the heat to low and cover it, because this is going to be my sauce for later on, okay? So at this point, if you want to take a moment to taste it, give it, blow on it a little bit so that it cools down. But it's going to be a really great, hopefully really delicious. And if it's not, think about salt level. Think about if it has enough salt. Think about if you like the acidity level. Think about if it has enough fat. Maybe you want to add a little bit more olive oil. Think about heat. Does it have enough black pepper and chili flakes for your liking? Okay, so those are all elements that I want you to think about when you taste it. And it's really important as a chef that you taste your food, okay? So that is so important. Don't ever serve food to a crowd that you have not tasted. That is my best advice to you today. All right, so at this point, we're going to be turning back on our water to get it back to a boil for our pasta. And then I'm gonna pull out my pasta dough, which is beautiful. I'm so excited. It's nice and bouncy. It's right where I want it. And then I have my flour. So it's definitely gonna have absorbed that flour a little more at this point. So I wanna put more flour down. All right, so I'm shaking my flour out onto the cutting board, spreading it out all over the cutting board. And this is gonna be easy. So as I begin, if you're not caught up, it shouldn't be hard. But again, we have a clean cutting board, we put some flour down, and we now have our dough. What I want you to do is I want you to take your dough out and just give it a little more flour, because it wouldn't hurt to roll it around in some flour, okay? And then I want you to cut it into 4 pieces. Where's my knife? Let's see here. All right, so I'm going to cut it in half and then half again on each side. I'm going to take 3 of these and put them back in my towel, just separate. All right, and then I'm going to cover them up so they stay nice and moist. And I have 1/4 in front of me. Okay? And then with this quarter, I want to make sure I have a nice thin layer of flour, but not too much. So I'm going to push some of it to the side right now. Just a nice thin layer. And I'm going to take this floured piece, this quarter of my dough, and I'm going to start really pressing it down and rolling it out. And if you have too much flour, you'll see it kind of slides. So you want to find your sweet spot. I'm going to start rolling it out and encouraging it to get nice and long, and at some point I might end up cutting it in half so that I can make it even longer. And I'm gonna press it, and roll it out to be as thin as a green bean, okay? So this is where you can get kids involved. It's pretty fun. Get your family involved. And so everyone can be rolling out pasta. And we're going to just press, and you're going to have to put a little love into it, all right? And it's not going to all be even. So some pieces are going to be fatter than others, and that's totally fine. This is peachy pasta, baby. It's pretty fun because you can do it with your hands like this. Sometimes I take it and I just kind of stretch it out a little bit, press it with my fingers just for this last bit, make it nice and thin. All right? And then if it pulls apart, all right, just take it and put it down. Then it should be ready. Okay, so we want a bunch of pieces that end up being beautiful pasta pieces. So here we go. I have my first one. Okay. It's not super thin. It's like the size of a green bean. And then I can take it and I can slice it or tear it apart. And I'm just going to slice it into a few long pieces. Okay? And you could always make them thinner. And then we're going to put these either on a plate or on the side of your cutting board. I'm going to grab a plate. And make sure once you finish rolling them out, make sure that you get flour on them so that they don't stick together. Okay, but this is not super duper thin. Okay, hopefully you can see that. That's fine. That's what makes it fun. They're almost like dumplings. Okay? So there we go. And like I said, if they break apart, great. Just keep it as is. Keep it like that. All right, now I'm going to have all these funky, fun little pieces here on a plate. And once we roll them out, we're going to boil them. All right, so there we go. I have 5 pieces so far. I'm going to take the other part of this first piece, get it rolled out nice and thin. Okay, groovy. All right, and then as I stretch it out, make it as thin as I can. Again, try not to make this perfect. This isn't supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to just be nice and long and fun and playful and rustic, okay? So there we go. I've got my nice long thin piece that I've worked out. All right, and then I'm going to slice it into smaller pieces. And when you slice it into smaller pieces, think about what size you want it to be when you serve it, because everyone has their own opinion on that, all right? And then I roll it in some flour so that it doesn't stick to the plate, doesn't stick to the other pieces of pasta. And then, voila. There we go. So I have my first round, and I have them all on this plate, okay? And this is about a serving of pasta. So think about that with how much you're making right now, okay? That's a quarter of this dough is about 1 serving, because they're going to get thick, and then you're going to add all that sauce, and then it works out really well. So if you're only serving 2 people, you could just roll out 2, and you could save that second half of dough for another day so that it's nice and fresh. Or you can roll it all out and you can freeze some of it and use it another time. Or just cook it and have leftovers, which is always fun. Okay, so you have a few options. So I'm just rolling out my second piece here. I'm going to, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to roll out 1/2 of my dough. So I'm going to save some dough for later. So just so you know, that's how I'm going to do it to show you guys how to finish this off. You know what? Meanwhile, really quickly, I can hear my water boiling. So I'm going to uncover the water, and I'm going to ladle in some of this water, just a little bit of this boiling water, into my sauce, just like a 1/4 cup, just a little bit, just to make sure I'm keeping my sauce nice and moist, okay? So just a side note that I have this water boiling, ready to rock as soon as I'm done rolling out my pasta. And it's only going to take a couple minutes to cook, and then I'll be adding it into my sauce and serving it up. Okay, there we go. Nice, beautiful, long piece. Some some of it's breaking apart. Perfect. In Tuscany, they actually serve this pasta most traditionally with breadcrumbs on it, which is very, very interesting. So you get these toasted, crunchy breadcrumbs on your pasta as your sauce with olive oil and whatnot. Kind of funky, fun, different. All right, so I understand you're all probably going to still be rolling. I want you to watch me for demonstration purposes so that you know how to finish this off, okay? So I have all these pieces here rolled in flour so that they don't stick to each other, and they're laid out onto a plate. All right? So there we go. Now, I'm going to come on over here to the boiling water, and I'm going to carefully just get them all in this water as quickly as I can without letting it splash me. All right, so just carefully sliding them in. And if I do it one by one, it makes it so it's less likely that they get stuck together. All right, so just sliding them into the boiling water. They're bright green, they're so fun. And as soon as I'm finished, I'm gonna take a spoon, a wooden spoon, and give it a stir so that they don't stick to each other. All right, so there we go. I see them in the water. Now, I'm going to set my kitchen timer to 5 minutes, all right? Although typically I can kind of tell when they're getting ready to go because they float to the top of the pot, all right? And once they float to the top of the pot, I give them about 1 more minute to cook so that they cook thoroughly, and then I pull them out. And when I pull them out, you can either strain it out if you'd like, or you can just take a slotted spoon, if you have one. Okay, I have this slotted spoon here, and I'm going to scoop it right out from the pot into the pasta sauce, just like that. All right, super simple. And I'm going to keep an eye on these. They're not floating to the top. Every few minutes, I'm going to give them a little bit of a stir, just to make sure they're A-okay. And then I'm going to keep an eye on it, make sure my my sauce is still looking good, which it is. Perfect. I love it. And these are starting to float around, which looks great. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a stir. They're getting close to come. Some of them are already floating to the top. So that's telling me that this is cooking quite quickly today. And then you're going to have handmade pasta to serve for dinner. Nice and healthy. Mediterranean flavors. You have lots of that healthy olive oil and all these fresh summer ingredients, and you have spinach packed into this pasta. So you're looking really good for your health level tonight, and you have something really delicious to serve. So it's pretty exciting. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some basil. And so you can do this whenever you pour your pasta in. You can get your basil ready to serve, and I'll show you how to do that while you continue to rolling it out. So I have some leaves here, and I'm just going to pull off about 5 or 6 big, beautiful basil leaves, and I'm going to give them a little bit of a rinse so that they're nice and clean. All right, so there we go. Grabbing my leaves, giving them a rinse. Voila, shaking them out. And then I'm going to take these leaves and I'm going to stack them one on top of another like pieces of paper. So they're nice and flat, one on top of another. Okay, and this is how we're going to make chiffonade. It's a great garnish on top. Now I'm going to roll this basil up to be a little burrito. All right, so I made my basil leaves nice and flat on top of each other. Now I roll them up like a little burrito, and I'm going to take the bottom of my knife, which is usually the sharpest, okay, and I'm going to slice some thin slices through my burrito. And it's going to turn these basil leaves into a basil confetti, which is going to be gorgeous on top of my pasta. All right, so there we go. I have these beautiful little confetti pieces of basil chiffonade, that I have ready to rock when I'm finished cooking my pasta. All right, so there we go. So my pasta is all at the top of the pot. I'm going to test one because they're pretty thick. by pulling it out and putting it down on my cutting board. And I'm just going to cut right through the middle and check out the middle of it. I'm going to make sure it looks like it's cooked thoroughly, and it should be very moist on the inside, and there shouldn't be any white in it. So mine's looking really good, and it's been about 4 minutes. I'm just going to taste it and make sure it tastes like it cooked through, which it does. So, woohoo! I have pasta. I'm going to pull off my cover here and throw the pasta into the sauce. Is everyone watching this? Hopefully everyone's paying attention here. So my pasta is now risen to the top of the pot. I let it sit for a couple minutes on the top of the pot to make sure it cooks thoroughly. And now I'm going to pull it with my slotted spoon and put it right into that pasta sauce. And at this point I can turn my pasta sauce off, the heat off, because it's already very hot and I'm adding some boiling hot noodles to it. All right, and then I'm tossing these noodles into the sauce. There we go. I got all my noodles here. And I can scoop in a little bit more of this pasta water, which is just going to help the sauce cling to the noodles. Just a quarter of a cup, not a lot. And then I'm going to stir it all around and coat these noodles in the sauce. And you have a lot of sauce there, okay? So you're definitely going to have enough for all of your noodles. And with that, it's time to serve. So I'm grabbing a spoon. I'm going to scoop out some of these noodles with this delicious sauce. I'm going to put them right in the middle of my plate. Make a little pile. I'm going to take some of those pine nuts, put those right on top. All right. So I've got my noodles in my sauce, got my pine nuts. If you have Parmesan or something like that, you can add some grated cheese on top, which is always a bonus. And I like to use my microplane for this. So the same thing I used to zest my lemon, I'm going to just give it a little bit of cheese grated on top. Beautiful. Okay, gorgeous. And then finally, to finish it off, I've got that basil chiffonade, and I can put that on top. And I have, there you go, a gorgeous plate of the pasta with the fresh summer sauce and some basil on top and some cheese. Probably gonna add more cheese, to be honest, because I love it. But there you go. So with that, I'm going to let you all go ahead and finish your dishes and put lots of love into them and enjoy. But if you take any photos or videos and you like to post on social media, I just put my social media in the chat. So please tag me, please let me know. I'd love to see and repost. Please let Wendy Manna know how you liked class. We'd love to hear back. And also, if you really enjoy cooking and you might like to cook with me more often, I do have a cooking club. And we cook together once a week. We make healthy but incredibly flavorful, delicious meals. Next week we have salt-crusted sea bass, or no, not sea bass, sorry, branzino. That's going to be really fun. We have a great seasonal cherry almond cake for a tea party coming up in 2 weeks. We have gochujang tofu class. We have a fermentation process class. Tons of cool classes. So you can check that out. Just email me. Shoot me an email if you want to come take a class. It's free, and my email is in the chat. Okay, so first class is free. Just email me if you'd like to join. I'd love to have you. Otherwise, enjoy your evening, enjoy your pasta, and I hope to see you again soon.